I think no person with any social conscience can hear the day's news without being filled with despair, police able to kill black men and women with impunity, frustration, Ben and Jerry's still wearing the mantle of progressivism, while 2 more migrant farm workers are rounded up at their factory gate, fear, a young woman abducted as she leaves her mosque to be brutally beaten and killed, and also anger. Virginia officials and much of the mainstream press calling that abduction and killing an act of road rage rather than an Islamophobic hate crime. But we're also here because we know that while we face the question of how it is that we can mount an effective resistance and how we can do so with concern for our own and others' well-being, the racist right has to be resisted. It cannot be given open space in which to recruit and grow. We are many, they are few, and so we need to come together. I want to thank tonight's panelists for sharing with us their experiences and perspectives that can help us with these questions. And they are, and I'll go ahead and suggest that this be the order for them to speak. Isaiah Hines of South Burlington High School. Who led the organizing to change the school's racist mascot, and for all of us who lived in South Burlington, it makes it possible for us to wake up every morning and say, okay, and then next will be Wafik Fahour, Palestinian rights activist and member of Vermonters for Justice in Palestine, or Just Peace in Palestine. And then he will be followed by Zuli Palacios, a migrant justice leader whose release from ICE detention was won by mass protests through struggle, though this struggle and further ICE roundups of Vermont migrant justice activists continue, hence I believe the sign in front of this podium, so I'm sure we'll be talking about that more tonight. And then finally, Carrie Peterson-Smith, who is a member of the International Socialist Organization in Boston, and an activist in Palestinian liberation and Black Lives Matter. I'll ask you to hold your questions and responses until after our panelists have presented. Each will be speaking for about 10 minutes. Then I'll come back to facilitate discussion. So first up is Isaiah Hines.
My name is Isaiah. I'm a recent graduate of South Burlington High School, and I'm just going to be talking to you a little bit about the work that I've done there over the past few years. So it's hard to really think of a specific starting point of this story, but I guess it really kind of began in 2015, the majority of this issue. When it was brought to the South Burlington School Board. And so a teacher employed in the district came to the South Burlington School Board with an issue. And the issue was our school's mascot. So he felt, and I believe that teacher was Greg Weaver. I'm not sure if he is still working in the district, but I believe he is, and I definitely give him a lot of credit for being one of the first to speak up. But Mr. Weaver came to the school board and kind of forced them to deal with this issue that had been present in our community for decades. And so he asked the school board to consider how our mascot may be problematic. And for those of you who don't know, our mascot was the Rebels, which is kind of a seemingly innocuous, harmless mascot on the surface level, but if you look a little deeper at our school's history, you can very clearly, very obviously see its connections to the Confederacy, a pro-slavery, anti-black, racist group. And those links are pretty well documented, but the school has worked hard to hide them from the students and the community, and they've been relatively successful at that. Here and there over the years, people have brought up the issue in an attempt to kind of readdress the rebel name, but it's never been successful until 2015. So at that point, the board was kind of forced to take it seriously, and they put it on the agenda for a discussion. The discussion was pretty, it wasn't very meaningful. So we heard from really only one side at that 2015 board meeting. People just kind of saying the same things over and over again. We've always been the rebels. That's what we're going to stay. In our school's 50-year history, the rebels has always been an important part of our school identity and our community identity, which I totally understand those arguments. And at the time, I was kind of just watching from the sidelines. I believe I was a junior or sophomore in high school at that point. So I was just kind of watching this debate, this very superficial, pointless debate where we were only hearing from one side. And the board patted themselves on the back and made themselves feel good by even addressing it publicly. And then I think a few weeks after that, they voted to maintain the rebel name. And so that was kind of when I took it upon myself to take the next step and become more involved in social justice work and organizing and activism. So following that 2015 board decision was when I personally started becoming involved in the Burlington and South Burlington communities. So after that, I was very disappointed with the school board, with my peers, with the community, because they really just hadn't listened. So kind of my way of dealing with that was to create a safe space, a group, where myself and my friends who felt the same way that I did could keep this discussion alive and keep talking about similar topics in a productive and meaningful way. So what I did was in 2015, I established what I call the Student Diversity Union at South Burlington High School. And that's like a racial justice organizing group on campus. And so over the past 2 years, we've done a lot of different work, but primarily hosting community-wide events, school-wide campaigns, little things here and there to kind of keep the community on their toes, I guess. So after I established that group, I very quickly became more and more involved in lots of different ways. I was volunteering at organizations like the Peace and Justice Center, which is an incredible organizing hub here in Burlington. And so by volunteering with those groups and doing research on my own time, I had become very quickly very active in the world of social justice. So I would bring that back to my group, and we would have regular meetings twice a month, and just we were kind of going on with our work. We were all pretty upset about the rebel name decision, but we kind of kept going, organizing anyway. So for a while, the rebel name issue was tabled. It was in the back of our minds. It was still an issue for us, but we couldn't see much hope. There wasn't really anything telling us that it was still a possibility that it could change. So most people had really given up at that point. And then in 2016, at the start of 2016, a spot opened up in the South Burlington School Board for a student representative position. And so at that point, I decided that I would run for student representative on the South Burlington School Board. And my goal by running for that position was not solely to change the rebel name. Surely that was in the back of my head. That was maybe something I considered, but really I joined to have a platform and to be able to bring issues of social justice to the district, and because I was passionate about school and community politics. So I applied for that position, and I was appointed to the school board the next month. And so once I got that position, I was able to kind of have a new perspective on the issue. I developed a relationship with the board members, and at some point in the following months of early 2016, it became clear to me that the rebel name issue wasn't finished. One of the board members had said something to me that just hinted at the rebel name issue being reopened or looked at once again by the school board. And so once I found that out, that kind of, it really pushed me to work even harder and to do more organizing around the issue. So at that point, I kind of expanded my efforts. I was reaching out to my classmates. We hosted a kind of a school-wide campaign to educate the student body about the history of our mascot. And I found that event really powerful, and I think a lot of students felt the same. And so by combining my roles as student representative on the school board and president of the Student Diversity Union at South Burlington High School, I was able to get some pretty effective information, or pretty important information out there. And so people were taking a second look at the issue, which was really awesome. And so I kind of kept that pressure on my classmates and more quietly on the school board for the next few months. And then in the fall of 2016, the school board was giving a yearly update on because it had been 1 year since the decision to maintain the rebel name. So they had given a kind of a status update. What had we done since the decision? What's been done in the district? What's been done in South Burlington High School? And so at that meeting, I believe it was October of 2016, they had handed me a list of what the school board had promised to do and what they had actually done. And I remember looking at the list and being just incredibly disappointed because none of the things they had said that they were going to do, they had actually followed through and done. So at that point, I decided to say something at the board meeting, and it was just something small, like these efforts are student-led efforts, and they can't be considered efforts by the district to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that little small statement that I made at that October board meeting ended up being way bigger than I definitely would have thought at the time. So it was picked up by like a local news source like Burlington Free Press or 7 Days or something like that. And there was like a headline, South Burlington student pushes for rebel name discussion. And so that, at that point, that kind of left me feeling really hopeful. And it left me feeling like, wow, I actually maybe can change the name still, after months and months of it being, seeming hopeless. And so at that point, I reached out to a group of parents in the district that had reached out to me before to express their support and their want to change the rebel name. So they formed a community task force, mostly parents and a few teachers, people that live in South Burlington. And I had met with that community task force a few times in the fall of 2016 to develop a few action steps that they would take to advocate for changing the rebel mascot. And then along with that, I met with the Student Diversity Union and developed a plan that we would do within the school to address the issue. And then I reached out to students at other schools in the area, Burlington High School, Winooski High School, and CBU, to get student support and kind of just get the issue out into the Vermont, just so Vermonters were talking about the issue. And I felt like that effort was pretty effective. And then in addition, I enlisted the help of just organizers and activists in the community that I had met throughout the past year of organizing, like the Peace and Justice Center and Black Lives Matter Vermont and the NAACP. And so with the help of those organizations, suddenly our little movement against our mascot had become really powerful. And so I read a statement at a board meeting, and the community task force did as well, and the student diversity union did as well. And so in February, or in January of 2017, everything kind of just came together, and we were pushing the board really hard. I was meeting with the board privately, and just really encouraging them to take a second look at the issue. And they finally agreed in January, and they put it on the agenda for February 1st. And at that meeting, they unanimously decided to change the rebel name. And yeah, so since then there's been a great deal of backlash, but also a great deal of support that I've received and the student diversity union has received. But that's basically an outline of the process and my involvement with it. And yeah, a lot has happened since, but that I feel like is the most relevant information. So that's my story.
I'm a member of Vermont for Justice in Palestine. Usually, when I speak on the Palestinian issue, but the racism and prejudice issue is very important these days. The first time I faced racism in this country, which means I experienced racism as a Palestinian refugee, grew up in the refugee camp in Lebanon from the Lebanese authority and big sector of the Lebanese people. But here, 3 weeks after I arrived to Boston as a student in Northeastern University, I became a member of Organization of Arab Students, and we received a letter from state of Mississippi, almost Mississippi. It's a small town, have the almost university, almost campus Mississippi, and ironically the name of their football team is the Rockets. The letter says 22 Arab students were facing discrimination by they writing graffiti on their doors, camel jockeys, ragheads, and leaving human feces on their doors. We collected money from Boston area and other New England states, and we drove to Mississippi, and this is the first time. But what happened to those students, the campus didn't protect them. They felt fear and scared, and they didn't leave the campus, but all together, the 22. The people who has cars will collect the others when they go to the bank or the only place they can go, which is bowling alley. At one point, the 22, they go together to the center of town to play on the bowling alley. The police comes in and arrests them. And the second day, the almost town newspaper comes in with a big line says Arabs occupy almost Mississippi Square. So we went over there collecting money to support them, to find a lawyer, and ironically the only lawyer who accepted their case was the only black lawyer on town. So this is the first experience of racism on here and how I look at it. But for today, the things happening against the Muslim community on here, it didn't happen only because we have a president, his name is Donald Trump. The racism on this country came in with the first step, the first white colonialist stepped out of the ship. And we have to face to that. Racism, it is within us. And the Muslim community get attacked not only by the right-wing Trump supporters. For years, the Muslims have been demonized from the left as much as the right. And we have to face to that. Otherwise, if we don't face to the racism and prejudice within us, we cannot face a solution. Racism is not only against Muslims as we see it. Racism goes against the native indigenous people who they supposed to be sitting with us on the table. Racism and the blacklist against the left during the 50s. The Japanese is against the blacks every day. Even though we celebrate 1 month a year of the black history, of the accomplishment of the blacks and contributions to this country, but we have another 11 months to do the opposite exact. We have to talk about what's happening the last week here in Vermont to our brothers and sisters, the migrants who are living and working on the shadow of our lives. Even though the politician says we need them, we need our workers, we need our food on the table, and we need Vermont to look beautiful with those farms dotted all over the place. But we don't want to see them. We want to keep them as slaves to it is supporting slavery in our modern time. And we see it every day, and we don't do anything about it. But it starts here, it's to solve it within ourselves, that we have a prejudice and we have to face it in the mirror. If we don't face to it, we cannot solve it. The most important thing for me is not let's stay only together, but we are building a bubble that we are only talking to each other. Every time we do something like that and we say education, 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 and the same faces we see, we meet each other and we talk the same thing and the same stories. We have to go to Main Street. How we can do something like that? Let's stay resistant to our message, which is the message of justice. Justice for the Muslim people who are facing threats, Muslims to the blacks, Muslim to the Jews who are facing anti-Semitism, Muslims to the migrants, justice to the migrants, justice to indigenous people. But let's go to the mainstream. Instead of demonstrating from point A to point B and go home and feel we're comfortable with what we do, let's go to the mainstream where they meet. Let's go to 4th of July and walk on 4th of July with our demands and our slogans. Let's go to the Labor Days and demand our demands for justice for all those groups. And let us and be courageous and take back the symbols that become frightening to us after Vietnam War, which is the flags. And let's carry the flags and put our slogans on it. Let's reclaim this country as country for all of us. If we don't do that, we're going to stay in the shadow, we're going to stay living on fear, and nobody will hear us but ourselves on this power. Thank you.
Hello everybody, thank you for being here. I really appreciate that, and thank you for inviting me too. My name is Suli. I don't know if you can hear me, maybe I was speaking. Okay, great. My name is Suli, I'm from Peru. I'm a member of migrant community here in Vermont, and also I'm here representing Migrant Justice. Migrant Justice is an organization based on dairy farm workers' rights. In Vermont, we are around 150 migrants working in a dairy industry. Most of them are from Mexico, and the rest we are from Latin America. As a community here in Vermont, we get together in assemblies. We have 3 assemblies, one in Addison County, one in Norris County, and the other in Franklin County. In those assemblies, we share foods, we know each other, and also we talk about the issues, what's going on in the country, our needs. So we achieved 2 successful campaigns. One of them is a driver license campaign, and the other a couple years ago, my community couldn't get the driver license. It was really hard to go to different places, to go to buy your own food, to bring your kids to the school. But now everybody who works and lives in Vermont can get it. And also, local immigrant means stop the collaboration between police and ICE. Since years ago, migrant community was being attacked. We were faced many struggles, and now we are still doing that. Obama was the president who deported more than any other president. Since Donald Trump was announced president, the fears come back for everybody, not only for migrant community, and also for the citizen people. Donald Trump, as you know, is the racist person ever I met. He's real racist, anti-immigrant. He's been attacking the migrant community since he was a candidate. He said that he will deport only criminals, but that's not true. He's been deporting many innocent people.
That's right.
Without any criminal record. Separating family, breaking John's dreams, and that's unfair. He doesn't know that we are humans like him, that we have the same rights like everybody. Even Vermont is a liberal state, we are still living like that. In these days, leaders like Victor, Miguel, like Kike, that is sitting right here, like me, we're being attacked. Why? Because we just raising our voice to defend our rights. Because we're raising our voice for our community. That's only the reason that I can understand. So last March 17, Kiki and I we were arrested by ICE when we were leaving Migrant Justice Office to our home. They follow us. They follow Sally in 4 cars. I mean, 4 agents in 3 cars. They were undercover. When they show up, they never say who are they. They never show up. They wait, and they never told us like why they are arresting us. They just start yelling and saying, "Get out of the car!" Like that moment was like, really terrifying for me. It was shocking. Never in my life I lived like that. And they just like pull us out of the car and just put the handcuffs on and separate us. They were just like trying to escape from our friends. They were hiding us. We were spending 11 days in the jail. We were 2 days in Vermont and the 9 days in New Hampshire. These days were really, really bad for me, and especially for my family. My family back in Peru, they don't know what's going on. They don't understand. Because in my country, we don't live like that. We don't like separating family. We're not putting jails in some people without any records. It was really hard for me and for my family, and I know for many families around the country. Leaders, like I said, leaders like us, we're the perfect target for ICE and Trump because they don't want to be raising our voice. They want to go back to the shadows, but it won't happen. We won't. Looking to intimidate us, you know? They don't want people to be in the street, having the life like everybody, you know? But now we need to be united, we need to be strong, and we need to fight for human rights and be part of this country because like everybody, we have dreams, we have families, we are looking for a better life. Okay? Because Donald Trump doesn't understand why we come to this country. He will never understand because he's rich. Since he was poor, he has everything. He doesn't know what does it mean to be poor, what does it mean to have dreams. He doesn't know disasters. He doesn't know anything. So. Last Saturday, my friends Yesenia and Elsa here, we were together. We were marching on the 13 miles march from Waterbury, from Montpelier to Waterbury. We were marching to demand Ben & Jerry's to implement a milk and dignity campaign because we're asking for a better housing, for fair wages. So they were together and they were watching for their rights. But now they are behind the bars. It's so sad what's going on with them. Now they are in New Hampshire in the same jail that we were kicking in. So I will tell you to join us Friday at 6 p.m. in the State House in Montpelier to demand their freedom. Because they are innocent, they don't have any criminal records, they are supporting the dairy industry right here in Vermont. So it's not fair for them to be in the jail. And also, I have a number, if you have a chance to call. It's from ICE Burlington for the Director Cronin, to ask if you can call and ask him for them freedom. The number is 781-359-7600. I will repeat again, 7600. Please call him and ask for them freedom. It's unfair that they will spend more days in the bar. They need to be with their family and sitting with us talking about this issue. Thank you.
While Chris making his way to the podium, I'll also say say that after tonight's discussion, anyone who wants to talk about carpooling to the rally on Friday in Montpelier, 6 p.m., meet in the back at the tables.
Well, I'm glad to see you all here, and I want to start by voicing something that I imagine will be familiar, which is just the range of feelings that one feels over the course of a day in the United States at the moment. Because when I woke up this morning and listened to the news, I felt the weight of what it means to be black in this country at the moment, and felt the weight that we all feel, what it means to be living in a country that is becoming more violent with every day. And so that was the morning, and now I'm here and I'm so inspired. And I'm inspired by the courage here in this room, on this panel. All of the folks who've spoken have also inspired. We'll talk a little more. No, all the panelists are speaking quite humbly, but what each of them is saying takes tremendous courage. It takes courage to speak out to the school board and say, we've got to take care of this. It's a shame that in Vermont, the Confederacy is being honored. In the school system, by the way. It takes courage to speak out against Islamophobia as a Palestinian refugee in this country. And it for sure takes courage to speak out in this incredible campaign that the state is targeting directly. And to persist takes courage. And these times that we're living in require courage. And they require mobilization. When I say it requires courage, I don't just mean the courage of us as individuals, though we're all kind of being tested, you know. But a collective courage. We have to build a collective confidence in ourselves that when one of us speaks up, somebody else has got our back. That many of us have got each other. And that's called solidarity. And it's one thing to say that it's needed, it's another thing to build it. It's going to be a process, and I think it's very difficult at the moment. You know, you're all in this room for a reason. And you know, we have a sense of what we're up against. It's an attack on all sides. And the fact is that at the moment, our side is not yet strong enough to turn the tide. It doesn't mean that it's all dire. We are scoring some victories. We've stopped the hideous Muslim ban twice. Yeah. People may have heard last week that the Trump administration quietly said that we'll maintain the DACA program for undocumented youth when this country started under Obama. Those are victories that have been won through the mobilization of popular protest. So it's possible to score some victories, but by and large, we've got a fight on our hands. And to turn the tide completely is something that we have to do, but it's not going to happen tomorrow, right? We have to build solidarity in every city across the country to stand up every time there's an ICE raid, or a white supremacist attacks people, or a misogynist at Planned Parenthood, or whatever. That kind of resistance has to be built. But I think what we've got here is a really incredible start, and actually, the impact of the migrant justice struggle here in Vermont is extending beyond Vermont. There are people around the country who are paying attention to the struggle that you all are waging here. But it takes some work to pay attention because mysteriously the mainstream media is not covering what I think is a really remarkable struggle here. Now, in a way it's not a surprise. If you pay attention to popular resistance, which I'm sure all of you know that the mainstream media tends to ignore that. Okay, but what about the fact that the kind of repression that's happening here in Vermont? Why are they ignoring that? I mean, we have a word for when organizers stand up to organize and get targeted by the state and arrested. Political prisoner.
That's right.
You have political prisoners in Vermont who are part of this campaign. Why is that not national news? There is I understand, a senator from Vermont who ran for president who could be talking about what the federal government, what the federal police are doing here in this state. Okay? Now, whether or not Bernie Sanders speaks out against this, we have to build a resistance. That's one of the points that I really want to drive home tonight, is that the media are not talking with any kind of alarm that is deserved about the wave of white supremacist attacks taking place across this country, that on campuses across the country, people are seeing these white supremacist flyers appear and so on, and obviously these obscene murders. That's what happened to our sister Nabra in Virginia. There is not the kind of attention by the mainstream media that those things deserve, nor is there attention from what is supposed to be the opposition party, the Democratic Party. Because when I turned on the news this morning, I didn't hear about this campaign in Vermont. I was hoping to hear something about the latest developments with Nabra in Virginia, or the latest developments with the case in Seattle where Charlena Lyles, a pregnant black woman surrounded by her 3 children, was gunned down by the Seattle police. I was hoping to hear the latest news on that, but instead what I heard were the latest developments in the hearings on Russia and the most expensive congressional race in history in Georgia. That's what the Democrats are concerned with, not with this wave of violence that's attacking us. So we have to build that kind of resistance. Now, I want to say a word about where this terror, this latest wave of terror, is coming from. And if we think that there is no connection between the brutal murder of Nabra in Virginia, the police shooting in Seattle, and the ICE raids in Vermont, we're wrong. All of those things are connected. It is the state. Obviously, we have a president who's quite open about using violence against people of color, against women. He's a serial sexual predator in the White House, right? And then the police in every city and state, and the federal police in the form of ICE and so on, are carrying out this violence. And I would add, it's not just the state domestically, but also when the US escalates its bombing in Syria, in Iraq, as it has been doing the past few months, that has an impact here. It is connected to the Islamophobic attacks and so on. So there is, I believe, a hope that amongst a lot of people on our side, that somebody will protect us from these white supremacists. The police will arrest them and so on, but actually the police are part of the problem. Yep. And we have to build a popular resistance. So let me say, I think that, let me say, I'll say a word about that in a second, but let me just say a word about where I think this is coming from. Because if one pays attention to the terror from the police and the terror from the far right in this country, then you actually know that it's not confined to this country. That in France, a fascist ran for president and did quite well. That in Britain, there has been racist campaigning in elections over the past year. That in India, there is an Islamophobic prime minister on the rampage. That in the Dominican Republic, they are kicking the Haitians out. That is all around the world. I'd say the people who run this country and the people who run every country, actually, have an agenda of misery for the majority of the world's population. It's not something that started with Donald Trump. It's not something that's confined to the United States. It's something that we're familiar with. We know that our wages are getting lower and that every city in this country is becoming unaffordable, right? And they want to continue that. They want to continue for companies to make so much money at the expense of us, the majority. And it's a tough pill to swallow because I've been doing it for so many years, and life is already so bitter for working class people in this country. And so what do? They say the problem is not that we're shredding what tiny remnants there are of a healthcare system or public education system. The problem is actually immigrants. They're stealing your jobs. They're stealing all of the bountiful resources of the American welfare state. They're getting on welfare, this very generous welfare system, and milking it, right? If you feel unsafe, the problem is Muslims. They're terrorists. That is the card that Donald Trump plays, but not just Donald Trump. As my sister pointed out, it was Obama who deported more migrants than any other president in US history. And that is a card that's being played by people who run every government in the world, frankly. And so there's a struggle here in Vermont. There's a struggle in this country. There's actually a global struggle for a different direction. And that's what I want to end on. So I want to get into the discussion. I think that, and again, what it means to build a popular resistance of ordinary people means declaring independence from the powers that be for a number of reasons. One, I think it's evident that, again, the Democratic Party, which is looked to as the opposition party, they're not interested in being in opposition. I mean, if ever there was a time to stand up to the Republicans, wouldn't it be now? Right? Wouldn't it be now that you have a serial rapist in the White House? If ever there was a time to confront the Republicans in Congress or on the local level, it would be now, and yet we're not seeing that. In fact, I heard on the news last week, finally a journalist pursued the question of why the Democrats in Congress aren't pursuing impeachment proceedings of Trump. And they said, well, we don't want to alienate voters for the next election. So that's what's on their mind. It would be fantastic if Trump was impeached. It's kind of hard to imagine him making it through the term, but it's been hard to imagine a lot of things that are happening. It's like literally, who knows, like a toss-up. But at the moment, the Democrats aren't interested in impeachment. If anything like that's going to happen, it's going to be from pressure from below. The other reason why we have to declare independence is because I think that we have to be guided by the principle that says an attack on any one of us is an attack on all of us. That is, I think that we have to oppose all of them. Sexism, racism, Islamophobia, the anti-migrant racism, the attack on people with disabilities, all of it. We have to oppose all of that. And the fact is that if we pursue a strategy that tries to curry favor with elected officials, they will say, well, I see what you're saying, but you want to stay away from the Muslims. Don't talk about the Palestine issue, that rocks the boat, right? And I think that we can't accept that. So there's more to say, but I just wanted to put that on the table. Okay. What I want to end on, though, is when we're under attack in the way that we are, and we're responding to each individual attack, which is, it's critical, but it also can be very easy to lose sight of a bigger picture. And I think we have to fight for the space to talk about a bigger picture that is one of liberation, actually. That is one, well, let me put it this way. The fact that there needs to be a struggle in Vermont to get rid of Confederate, this mascot that's nostalgic for the Confederate era, speaks to the fact that when we talk about fighting racism in the United States, as my brother Lafiq said, this is not a new question. We're talking about the foundation of the United States. It was founded on ethnic cleansing of indigenous peoples, on the enslavement of black people. That's the foundation of the country. And if we're talking about ending racism, which I think has to be the conversation, then we have to talk about a total transformation of the society. Similarly, if we're talking about migrant justice, I mean, there are so many, yes, we need to fight for higher wages for the migrant workers who work in this state and across the country. And yes, we have to fight for the right of refugees from Syria or Iraq or anywhere else in the world to come here unfettered. I think that we should have a migration policy that is one word: welcome. So we have to fight for the right of people to come here. But we also have to fight for a world in which nobody feels compelled to leave where they're from.
That's right.
Because people aren't choosing to leave Syria or Iraq. Their countries have been destroyed. And the United States has had something to do with that, actually. And if you know the history of Latin America, the same can be said. Okay? So that, I think, has to be the vision, is actually fighting for a completely different society. And I'll say that, speaking for myself, I became an activist when I saw all kinds of injustices and felt the need to stand up to them. I became a socialist, which is a particular kind of activist, for two reasons. One, because I saw those things as connected. It's not that sexism's over here and racism's over here and exploitation, but these things are all part of a system of oppression. That's one thing. And the other thing is when I concluded it doesn't have to be this way. That it's actually possible to have a world in which people can not only have dreams but pursue their dreams. And so I think, in conclusion, we have to continue to build on the work of standing up to the attacks that we're facing in the here and now, continue to win the victories that we can, but also fight for a liberated future. And I'll end there. Thank you.